Last week, we discussed finding your sources and evaluating them. This week, we're going to begin our discussion on using those sources. I've mentioned time and time again that arguments are conversations, and in every text or source you read, at least two arguments exist: a response to an argument and the author's views themselves. So with your problem solution essay, you're entering an ongoing conversation with your sources. And the main idea is multi-pronged. You want to figure out what they say, figure out what you say, and put all of it together in a synthesized conversation that's ultimately dominated by your voice. To make an impact as a writer, then, you need to do more than make statements that are logical, well-supported, and consistent. You must also find a way of entering into the conversation with views of others and something they say. And the easiest and most common way to do that is by summarizing what others say and then by using it to set up what you want to say. And the question is, why? Why do I have to do that? And the answer is that if you don't identify what they say, what you're responding to, your own argument probably won't have a point. Your reader will wonder what prompted you to say what you're saying and therefore motivated you to write. So what you're saying may be clear to the audience, but why you're saying it won't be. So take, for example, my phrase here: the characters in The Sopranos are very complex. After hearing that claim, what's your initial response? Okay, so, and your point is, who cares? Why are you telling me that the characters in The Sopranos are very complex? Now look what happens when the same statement is framed as a response to something they say. For example, author X says that The Sopranos presents caricatures of Italian Americans. That's something that they say that I'm responding to. In fact, however, the characters in the series are very complex. The same claim that the characters in the series are complex becomes much stronger when presented in response to a contrary view. Now we can see that there's a clear goal, a clear mission, a clear argument that I am opposing, or I'm in opposition of what this person has said, and now I am trying to argue in a way to correct that mistaken characterization. Your textbook offers a variety of templates that help structure this they say, I say framework, but it doesn't always have to be presented in that kind of dry, clear-cut, obvious sort of way. So for example, I'd like you to consider the introduction or the opening to the essay that I asked you all to read for this week on fast food and the fast food industry. Zinchenko writes, "If ever there were a newspaper headline custom made for Jay Leno's monologue, this was it. Kids taking on McDonald's this week, suing the company for making them fat. Isn't that like middle-aged men suing Porsche for making them get speeding tickets? Whatever happened to personal responsibility?" So here in his opening, he's responding to something that someone else has said, or responding to something that he has seen. This kind of exigence, remember that word from Unit 1? And then he adds his perspective or his viewpoint where he says, I tend to sympathize with these portly fast food patrons though. Mainly that's because I used to be one of them. In his introduction, Zinchenko relies on a version of the they say, I say formula, but his writing is anything but robotic or uncreative. He instead does not explicitly use the words they say and I say, but he does in fact, use that underlying structure by saying, or essentially saying, they say that kids suing fast food companies for making them fat is a joke, but I say these lawsuits are justified. So you don't have to necessarily frame it in that dry kind of robotic framework, but you do need to make it clear in your writing that you're responding to and either agreeing with or disagreeing with, or whatever you want to call it, with something that you've read in your sources. Part of entering the conversation, or figuring out the conversation, if you will, relies on summarization and quoting. And I've asked you guys to read in our books for this week the pages in our text on summarizing and quoting, which is hopefully a review from English 111, where we really focus on figuring out how to read for arguments. But now I want to move into the more daunting task of entering what is to surely be a high stakes, powered conversation confidently. So essentially, there are three ways to do this. There are three ways to include differing perspectives, and for our most immediate concerns, the sources from your annotated bibliography for your problem solution paper. You can disagree, agree, or agree and disagree. And you may be wondering, how do I do that? Or why do I do that? Won't fitting my response into one of these three categories force me to oversimplify my argument or lessen its complexity, subtlety, or originality? On the contrary, the more complex and subtle your argument is, and the more it departs from the conventional ways people think, the more your readers will need to be able to place it on their mental map in order to process the complex details you present. In other words, the complexity, subtlety, and originality of your response or your responses are more likely to stand out and be noticed if a reader has a baseline sense of where you stand relative to any ideas you've cited. So let's look at disagreement for a minute. And you want to resist the urge to say, I entirely disagree with so-and-so for his or her views on X. You may also see disagreement or disagreeing as the easiest way to generate an essay where you can find something you disagree with in what has been said or might be said about your topic, summarize it, and argue with it. But disagreement poses hidden challenges. You need to do more than simply assert that you disagree with a particular view. You also have to offer a persuasive reason or reasons why you disagree. So for example, although X says women's rights are improving, they are not. If you simply contradict a view or contradict an argument, you really fail to add anything interesting or new. To turn it into an argument, you need to give reasons to support what you say. Some examples of those reasons could be because another's argument fails to be relevant or take relevant factors into account, because it is based on faulty or incomplete evidence, because it rests on questionable assumptions, or because it uses flawed logic. It's contradictory or overlooks what you take to be the real issue. In other words, to move the conversation forward and justify your act of writing to begin with, you need to demonstrate that you have something new to contribute. And you can find some ways of disagreement, some templates on framing your disagreements in your textbook on page 756. Like disagreement, agreeing is less simple than it may appear. Just as you need to avoid simply contradicting views you disagree with, you also need to do more than simply echo views you agree with. Even as you are agreeing, it's important to bring something new and fresh to the table. You want to add something that makes you a valuable participant in the conversation. You may point out some unnoticed evidence or line of reasoning that supports X's claims that X herself hadn't mentioned. You can cite some corroborating experience or a situation not mentioned by an author that her views help readers understand. Or if X's views are particularly challenging or esoteric, what you bring to the table could be an accessible translation, and in other words, an explanation for your readers not already in the know. Your text can usefully contribute to the conversation simply by pointing out unnoticed implications or explaining something that needs to be better understood. Whatever mode of agreement you choose, the important thing is to open up some difference or contrast between your position and the ones you're agreeing with, rather than simply parroting what it says. So agreement and disagreement, or disagreement and agreement, are things that you guys are intimately familiar with. These are things that you have done before. The other option for including different perspectives in your essay is the agree and disagree method. It's my favorite way because it really shows that you are thinking complexly and outside of the box. It moves beyond that I'm right, you're wrong, no I'm not, yes you are, kind of framework of arguments that you see so often in these kind of limited arguments. One helpful way of agreeing and disagreeing simultaneously is to agree in general with a particular statement or a particular viewpoint, but disagree with the particulars. For example, I agree with Jane Doe that parking is a problem on campus. That's my point of agreement. However, but her solution to the problem is not one that would work here. And by disagreeing with her solution, not necessarily the problem, this opens me up to offering my particular point of view or my particular argument. Another way to agree and disagree simultaneously is to disagree in general, but concede with particulars, or in other words, agree with the particulars. For example, while John Doe is mistaken in his views that parking is not a problem on campus, he does raise good points about students not making enough use of public transportation or carpooling enough. So I'm disagreeing with his statement in general that parking is not a problem, but I'm conceding to these points about public transportation and carpooling. So there are various ways that you can add complexity or show complexity with your argument and with your sources by agreeing and disagreeing with them. So you might be asking yourself, what does this have to do with the price of tea in China? Or what does this have to do with what I'm currently working on? As you compile and complete your annotated bibliographies, and as you read through the sources, because that's what you're really going to be doing this week, you want to ask yourself, what do I agree with in relation to my sources? What do I disagree with in relation to my sources? And how do these various sources respond to, agree with, or disagree with each other? So you're looking for all of these connections within your text and how you might want to use them in your problem solution paper. Because let's face it, knowledge is messy, and these issues that you're presenting generate a conversation, and every person addresses that topic differently. No one is right. Everyone is wrong. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But your goal is to find a way to fit that various material together in a way that is logical and cohesive. This will help you not only formulate your own ideas, but it's going to set you up for what we're going to discuss next week when we discuss synthesizing those sources within your paper. So that's what I have for you all for this week. These are things that I want you to think about as you work through and find your sources. And in order to kind of practice those ideas, I've asked you all to read an article that I mentioned earlier in this lecture, Don't Blame the Eater, by, I think it's David Zinchenko. And I want you guys to think about, and this is the basis of your discussion board for the week, is to think about his perspective on what he's saying in this article and figure out a way that you can agree and disagree with some of the perspectives that he presents. And this is going to be, I'm going to add to this next week with another article and another article, so we can practice not only figuring out how to respond to and create our own arguments, but also find a way to synthesize those various voices together, which will make sense, I hope, in the next coming weeks. So let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. Keep these ideas in mind as you move through and work on your annotated bibliographies. And please feel free to email me if you have any questions or concerns in regards to this or any of the information presented this week.